Hello again. Despite the accusations of racial prejudice, which are sometimes, well, indeed, frequently levelled against me, my attitude to money and the way in which it can disappear without trace is strictly non-racist. I assume that if money is floating about and nobody is keeping a close eye on what is happening with it, then somebody will pinch it. This general rule applies alike to white people and black, Gentiles and Jews, Americans and British. It is a cross-cultural phenomenon which is common to all nationalities, ethnicities and skin colours. So it was that when I saw yesterday that one of the people who organised the protest in 2020, which resulted in that statue in Bristol being thrown in the harbour, had pleaded guilty to pinching a lot of money raised on the back of the event, I was not in the least bit surprised. A black woman called Yvonne Maina raised £30,000 so that children could be sent to Africa to see the achievements of African culture. Instead, she pocketed it and has now pleaded guilty to doing so. This is where I differ, of course, from anti-racists, because white liberals have a bizarre faith in the innate integrity and honesty of black people and assume that they will not behave like anybody else where money is concerned. This is, of course, a racist attitude in itself, subscribing to a view that some ethnicity is inherently more trustworthy and noble than another. White liberals will throw money in the general direction of black activists and then not ask them to account for what has become of the funds. We saw a lot of this in the aftermath of George Floyd's death and the Black Lives Matter protests which followed it. I shall come back to that in a minute. Looking now at the black woman who pinched that £30,000 in this country and deprived those kids from going to see at first hand the wonders of African culture, she has since changed her name from Yvonne to Xahra, and how you might pronounce that I have no idea at all. Zara, perhaps? Her new surname is Salim, which has a vaguely Muslim air about it. This too is something which is seen in black tricksters, by the way, the adoption of an exotic foreign-sounding name. Again, this is a strategy which works well in bamboozling white liberals who are always impressed by black people with strange-sounding foreign names, especially if they might be Muslims. Once more, this is a sign of racism on the part of such white people. Miss Salim, by the way, is formerly of Bristol, then of Swindon, and now claims to come from Romford, so she certainly moves around a bit. Romford, that doesn't really go with such a fancy name, does it? The £30,000 which Salim has pleaded guilty to making off with is small change compared with what has been going on in the United States, of course. The Black Lives Matter movement is a prime example in which many big companies simply threw money at it and didn't trouble to ask themselves what was being done with that money. Naturally enough, much of it was spent on mansions, swimming pools and so on for a few favoured leaders. This is not the only case, though. Those following the career of a man called Ibram X, Kendi, who has been running the Centre for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University, have been hugely entertained at developments there. I read a book by Ibram X. Kendi a year or two back called How to Be an Anti-Racist. It was, needless to say, favourably received by all the usual left-wing white suspects. How could it not be? Here was a man with the most wonderfully exotic and vaguely Muslim-sounding name, and he was a professor of African studies into the bargain. I guess that he was not all that he appeared to be, simply by the fact of that name. He was born Henry Rogers, and only adopted the name of Ibram X. Kendi when he wanted to become a leader of black studies. That nobody finds it odd that somebody switches names in this way, just like Yvonne from Romford becoming Zara Salim, tells me once again that many white liberals are the worst kind of racists at heart. Changing your name in this way used to be a very suspicious act, and it was often the hallmark of the confidence trickster, the man who posed as a titled gentleman and thus defrauded money from those who were impressed by somebody pretending to be a lord. I'm sure that if I popped up elsewhere on the internet or in real life, calling myself, say, the Right Honourable Peter Forbes Gillingham, most people would smell a rat and wonder what game I was playing, and quite rightly too. But then I'm white. When Henry Rogers starts adopting the name of Ibram X. Kendi, though, nobody bats an eyelid. When somebody with such a great name took up a post at Boston University and started a Centre for Anti-Racism in 2020, the year that George Floyd died, the money began flooding in. £8 million from Jack Dorsey, the man who started Twitter, alone. And in the first couple of years, another £40 million from other corporate sponsors. Hardly anything was produced by the Centre in the way of research or academic papers, and a week ago half the staff at the Centre was sacked, and questions finally began to be asked about what had happened to all the money and what it had been spent on. This is a story which is likely to run for some while, by the way. Speaking for myself, I would not dream of handing over a penny to anybody who had changed his name in that way, whatever colour his skin was, because, as I said, switching around names like that is almost always a warning sign that something dodgy is going on. Those people who give black people a pass for behaviour which would be fishy if seen in white people are the real racists. They subscribe to a version of the old idea of the noble savage, about which I spoke a few days back, in which white people romanticise anybody with a black or brown skin and assume that they are somehow more natural and less corrupt than white people, and can be trusted more readily to do the right thing and to behave ethically. This is the new and acceptable face of racism, when you treat people differently and trust them more simply because of the colour of their skin. As usual, in the description to this video, I give a few links to articles on the subjects about which I've been speaking this morning.